What Elephant? Written and illustrated by Genevieve Cote. It was a quiet day, a day like any other day, when George burst out of his front door, shouting at the top of his lungs, "Help! Help! There's an elephant in my house!" A small crowd gathered around George. "Elephants don't break into houses," someone giggled. "But this one did. It really did. When I went home, there was an elephant sitting on my couch. It was watching TV and eating my chocolate chip cookies," insisted George. His best friend Pip shook his head. "Elephants don't watch TV, and they certainly don't eat chocolate chip cookies. You're probably out in the sun too long. Why don't we go home and get some sleep?" "Maybe Pip is right," George said to himself as he slowly walked away. But the minute he set foot in his house, George heard loud snores coming from the bedroom. An elephant was sprawled across his bed. George settled on the broken couch. Elephants should never sit on couches, and since the elephant had blown his very large nose on every single one of his bed sheets, George covered himself with old newspapers. "I'll go to sleep, and surely when I wake up, everything will be quite normal," he thought as he closed his eyes. But when George awoke the next morning, the couch was floating on a sea of soapy water. George heard a loud splashing coming from the bathroom. The elephant was in the shower. Elephants should never linger in showers. "When will I wake up from this very strange dream?" George wondered, as he fished out his prized collection of teapots. By the time he had mopped the floor, George was very hungry, and when he opened the kitchen cupboards, there was nothing but crumbs. All the cookies and peanut butter, all the bread, milk, and bananas were gone. George had heard a loud croak coming from the dining room. Elephants should never eat cookies for breakfast. This must be the longest dream in the whole world, sighed George as he walked to the grocery store. But when George came back, the elephant was still there. It was sitting on George's broken couch, reading George's newspaper and wearing George's dressing gown. "Elephants can't read," said George. "This isn't really happening." But day after day, the elephant remained, and George stepped around it. He stayed home and kept to himself. He ate little and slept even less, and he hardly ever smiled anymore. "Maybe I'm crazy," he worried, but he didn't dare tell anyone about the elephant again, not even Pip. After a whole week had gone by, Pip came around to inquire after George. "You don't seem like yourself," he said. "I hope you aren't seeing elephants again." George pretended to laugh. "Elephants? Why, elephants don't live in houses. They don't sleep in beds or eat chocolate chip cookies, and they certainly don't read newspapers. No, I just needed some sleep, like you said." But when they walked into the garden, Pip suddenly paled. "George, are you sure you don't see elephants anymore?" "Maybe he can tell something's wrong with me," thought George. So he answered, "Not even the faintest shadow of an elephant's tail." "Oh no," thought Pip. "Then I'm going mad," for he could see right there in the middle of the garden a large elephant, shiny with suntan lotion. He felt too embarrassed to tell George, so George and Pip chatted about the weather. Neither of them mentioned the overpowering scent of coconut oil. A little later, when their friend Maggie came by, she stopped in her tracks. "Is that an elephant lounging on the flower bed?" she wondered. But Pip and George didn't seem to notice anything strange. "This is crazy," thought Maggie. "I'm seeing things. Maybe I've been out in the sun too long." Determined not to talk about sunbathing elephants, Maggie sat in the shade and stared at her lemonade. It was such a fine day that many more friends and neighbors stopped by, but each in turn fell silent, struck by the same terrible thought. "I must be mad, crazy, nuts, out of my mind." For no one mentioned or even seemed to notice a large elephant lying lazily in the sun. Suddenly, the silence was broken by a shout. "Shiraz, there you are! I've been looking for you all week." A very angry little man marched towards George. "You, sir, why didn't you bring her back? Why did you hide my elephant in your house? Shiraz, my little buttercup, are you all right?" He flung his arms around the elephant. I tried to, stammered George. I thought, stuttered Pip. I didn't want anyone to think, stumbled Maggie. Then George and his friends looked up at the elephant right there beside them. They each let out a huge sigh of relief, struck by the same wonderful thought, "I'm not mad, crazy, nuts, or out of my mind after all." When they began to explain, the little man laughed, wondering how anyone could not see an elephant.
You must have thought that you were invisible here, poor Cupcake.
Hugging the elephant, he said to the crowd,
She ran away because the circus hired a new talent, and my Shiraz wants to be the only star. My little sweet pea, don't you know you'll always be my biggest star?
And Shiraz dropped 2 large tears on her trainer's nose. After lemonade and chocolate chip cookies, Shiraz and the little man walked off into the sunset, side by side. Elephants should never leave on an empty stomach. With embarrassing giggles, everyone else drifted away, and soon George was alone with Pip. I'm sorry, George, said Pip. I should have believed you from the start, and I should have insisted, George began, when he was politely interrupted by a high-pitched voice.
Excuse me, gentlemen. Which way is it to the train station?
Surely this couldn't be the voice of a pink poodle carrying a pink suitcase. Pip, did you hear that? Hear what?
What Elephant by Genevieve Cote was read and recorded by Christine Bansner.